Joining us this morning. My name is Marissa Payne. I'm the Celebrations Product Manager at Prestige Care. Celebrations is our wellness-focused lifestyle product. We also have Expressions, which is our award-winning memory care product. And it's Prestige's commitment to the overall physical and cognitive well-being of our residents and seniors that has led us to invite the Ryan Glatt with us here today. So Ryan is with the Pacific Neuroscience Institute. He's a research associate and brain health coach. He's going to give a 45-minute presentation and then open it up to answer your questions at the end. And I will go ahead and pass it over to Ryan to go ahead and make his own introductions and get started. Over to you, Ryan.
Thank you so much, Marissa. I really appreciate you having me here today. And thank you everyone for coming and for your attention on this important topic. The title of today's presentation is Your Brain on Exercise. So my background is a little bit varied. I have a background in personal training and fitness. I've been in the health and fitness industry for over 10 years. I know I look like I'm in my mid-20s. I'm 30 years old, and I've been training since I was 17. And I quickly garnered an interest in neuroscience and gaming after having a concussion as a youth and having to rehab my concussion through different activities. One of the activities that I utilized to rehab my concussion was active video games. One of them was called Dance Dance Revolution. The other was called the Nintendo Wii. I'm sure you've heard of one or both of those. And through my video game addiction, I actually was able to rehab myself physically and cognitively, lose weight, become a trainer, and help others achieve that same thing. Through my experience, I became a massage therapist, a health coach, helping people get out of pain. And I really wanted to help people from the neck up. And I started to incorporate some of my more personal experience and my familial experience with mental health and dementia to channel some of that passion and experience towards brain health. I got a master's in applied neuroscience from King's College of London. I have a bachelor's in exercise science. And there's also this kind of somewhat make-believe title called a brain health coach. A health coach is a real thing. There's a board certification for health coaches now, and my specialty is focused on achieving better brain health. The place where I work is called the Pacific Brain Health Center in Santa Monica, California. It's an outpatient clinic for geriatrics and neurologists. And I work with the patient population here to either prevent or improve the condition of neurological and neurodegenerative conditions such as Parkinson's, dementia, mild cognitive impairment, and the like. So the reason we're here today is because we're either affected directly by or interested in preventing or both this idea of cognitive impairments. And cognitive impairments is a huge issue that our globe, our entire world is facing now. And it's not just the US, these are US statistics, but this is a global issue in which we're experiencing exponential numbers and increases in the prevalence of dementia cases, specifically Alzheimer's cases, which makes up about 60 to 80% of dementia cases. And dementia simply refers to neurodegeneration marked by cognitive impairment that eventually interferes with activities of daily living and independence. But you can see that from 2005, about 25 million projected cases of Alzheimer's to the year 2050, which will be 106 approximately million. And now these numbers are from 2007, so these are out of date. This does not even near capture the new numbers coming out that demonstrate the exponential nature of this issue that we're facing. However, it's not just about Alzheimer's and dementia. There's other conditions that affect cognition and brain health. The brain being a very sensitive vascular organ, a lot of what happens below the neck affects the neck up. And so medications, obesity and metabolic disorders, cardiovascular conditions, cancer and chemotherapy are all different things that can affect brain health. And so it's likely that dementia affects the majority of people because of its prevalence. But once you start to factor in things like diabetes, obesity, metabolic issues, cardiovascular conditions, medications, people struggling with cancer, or what's called CRCI, cancer-related cognitive impairments, you start to think, wow, everyone's brain health is affected by these conditions, and therefore it behooves us to ask the question what we can better do to improve our brain health. Even if you're not an individual with a chronic condition or have a risk of dementia. I'm 30 years old. I'm, of course, being in the field, I'm very biased. I am thinking about preventing dementia, but I'm also thinking about how do I just get through my day and optimize my cognition in my 30s in the short term and day to day. How can I improve my energy levels, my thinking abilities? And so we're also going to talk about different interventions that aren't just for dementia prevention, but can help you rather immediately in terms of improving your cognitive functioning, your thinking abilities, and your mental health. So I keep throwing around this word cognitive. What does cognitive mean? Cognition refers to a set of mental skills that allow us to interact with the world outside of us, around us, with other people, and with ourselves. And so these cognitive skills include things like perceiving what's around us, taking in information, paying attention, memorizing things, reasoning skills. And there's different subdivisions of these cognitive domains. It's kind of like muscle groups, if you will, for the brain. So with perception, we can take in things visually, auditorily. With attention, we can focus our attention. We can sustain it for a period of time, hopefully what you're doing with this presentation, or maybe you're dividing your attention because you're watching your grandkid, or you're texting somebody, or you're checking your emails as you're watching this presentation, and that would be divided attention. Then there's memory, and there's a lot of different kinds of memory, and when people say they have memory loss or they're experiencing memory declines, they often aren't specific, but to help us be more specific, there's short-term memory. There's working memory, which is temporarily holding information in your brain. There's long-term memory, which actually gets better with age. We call that wisdom. There's visual memory, memorizing visual representations in the world around you, and auditory memory, so remembering names or words or lyrics and things of that regard. And then there's other skills like reasoning, deductive and inductive reasoning. And we don't need to be exhaustive here, but it's helpful to understand that there's different types of cognition. And our goal would be to improve, or at least prevent decline in these different cognitive skills. Now, that when we talk about preventing decline, it's challenging to do that in several ways because there is a normal age-related decline associated with these skills. And unfortunately, with this pandemic of not just the dementia issues we're facing, but also the COVID issues that we're facing, the mental health issues that we're facing, the neurological conditions that are now on the rise, or at least more so. It's not just about stopping these things from changing, but making them slow down in terms of their decline. And we're going to look at some different aging charts to show us how the brain changes over time and how we might be able to slow that down and not stop it from happening altogether, but kind of impede the process. There's also something called neuroplasticity, which is your brain's ability to change. Now, earlier in life, on the left-hand side here, when you have a child or you are a child, your brain's ability to change in response to experiences is very strong, meaning it's a very plastic, sensitive process in which you're changing your brain in response to everything you're going through and experiencing. And so as we are kids, or as we have kids, we find that the brain of children is very plastic. It can be influenced by a variety of these experiences. As we age, especially in middle age, mid-20s to early 30s, depending on gender and other things, that plasticity starts to cement a little bit, but we remain plastic, but the amount of effort required to elicit those changes, to elicit and take advantage of neuroplasticity in later years is greater. But what happens with older age or increased age? We might experience something like retirement, in which we're removing a huge source of cognitive stimulation. We might experience sedentary behavior. And in fact, most older adults, 60 and up, are not adhering to the minimum physical activity guidelines. 80% of older adults are what would be considered sedentary. So from a cognitive standpoint and a physical standpoint, we're not having this effort in the active aging community that we would be looking to elicit neuroplasticity with. Now, let's say you are starting to experience cognitive changes, or someone you love or know is starting to experience cognitive changes. Where did all that start in relation to normal, healthy aging? So if you look at the top green line, the top green line represents what's called normal aging. And there's two green lines. There's one that's a little bit steeper and one that's not as steep. And so the one that's steeper is still healthy aging. It's just happening a little bit faster. And this will depend on genetics, lifestyle, environment, socioeconomics, all sorts of things. Now, if you see this, it's a decline. And just like any organ in the body, the brain does change. Now, many people, especially looking at these statistics, will likely be on the blue line, which is this subjective cognitive impairment, meaning I'm noticing changes, and this is where it gets a little tricky. I'm noticing changes that might be abnormal or they might be normal. And the way you find out is by working with a doctor. So any older adult, 60 or 65 years and up, should get a memory evaluation of some kind. But these preclinical stages, meaning there's no diagnosis of any cognitive impairment whatsoever, have these subjective memory declines or subjective cognitive changes. And even some of the research we're doing here at the Pacific Brain Health Center, we use neuroimaging like quantitative EEG to detect changes in brain activity before you even notice something is changing in your brain. So that's why it's important to go see a neurologist or a psychiatrist or a neuropsychologist to have different types of testing like cognitive testing, neuroimaging, genetic testing to see, can you detect changes before you even feel them? But if you're starting to feel changes that you feel are somewhat abnormal, or a loved one is going through that process, that's the stage in which you should see a doctor. Therefore, you could hopefully get some early detection of any sort of cognitive impairment, and early detection of cognitive impairment alone could save the healthcare industry trillions of dollars. Now, let's say that doesn't happen and we think it's normal or we ignore it and it continues to decline. You run the risk of being diagnosed or at least having something called mild cognitive impairment, which is a cognitive change of concern to an individual or family member, and one or more domains of cognition are impaired significantly, such as memory. However, you can still go through your activities of daily living, sometimes questionably, driving and managing finances, depending on the severity of mild cognitive impairment. You could still probably do them, but not as well. Or maybe you have trouble with names and faces or remembering events. Now, if nothing's done about that, then there's the risk of running to dementia, which is cognitive impairment severe enough to interfere with everyday abilities. And there's different stages. There's, of course, different types. There's Alzheimer's disease, vascular dementia, Lewy body dementia, frontotemporal dementia, mixed dementias, Parkinson's dementias. There's a lot of different types of dementia. So the goal here is to intervene earlier rather than later. Even if you're in the green line, a lot of the things that we'll be talking about are associated with slowing down this trajectory. So the idea is that we want to slow down this trajectory as much as possible. So how do we do that? Well, before we talk about what goes into it, it's important to talk about this concept called cognitive reserve. And cognitive reserve refers to your brain's mental gas tank. And the higher this cognitive reserve, the longer your brain can go for. And so the longer your brain can go for, the more you can avoid neuropathologies like dementia. However, if you have a low cognitive reserve, you're more likely to encounter neuropathologies or suboptimal brain aging earlier in the process. So what are the things that go into cognitive reserve? Well, there's different things that go into it. The first one, we're going to start in the upper left-hand corner with modifiable health factors. That includes a lot of different things. One of the things it includes is more general modifiable health factors. So if you have a chronic condition, either preventing or managing that chronic condition, blood pressure management, preventing and managing diabetes, cardiovascular conditions, things of that regard are very important. Sleep apnea and diagnosing that and treating it if you do have it, those things are critical. In fact, blood pressure management, management of sleep apnea and treatment of that, all things that are heavily, heavily important for brain health. But then there's other lifestyle behaviors such as exercise, diet, stress, nutrition, things of that regard. The one we're talking about the most or focusing on is going to be exercise. Education seems to make a difference. Social support seems to be important. Positive affect or maintaining good mood states, stimulating activities and novel experiences, and cognitive training or cognitive stimulation are all things that go into cognitive reserve, that the more we have, the likelihood of increasing the cognitive reserve is going to be higher. And certainly if we're focusing on what's called adaptive factors, which means we're focusing on enough behaviors that are in favor of adaptive neuroplasticity, meaning we're maintaining a healthy brain, the more likely we're going to have healthy aging. But if we have accelerated decline due to maladaptive factors like sedentary behavior, poor nutrition, poor sleep hygiene, consuming drugs or alcohol to a high degree, then we're more likely to experience cognitive decline. But through different lifestyle behaviors and therapeutic mechanisms found in diet and exercise, we might be able to offset some of that cognitive decline. So it really never is too late, but the better we intervene, or the sooner we intervene, the better. So there's different ways in which exercise, which has been found to be one of the most powerful interventions to affect brain health, can affect the brain. And the World Health Organization lists off these different lifestyle interventions, and exercise has been found to be one of the most evidence-based and one of the having the most strongest effect in terms of preventing cognitive decline, especially in those without cognitive impairment. In individuals with cognitive impairment, there's a moderate degree of research on mild cognitive impairment and sort of controversial areas in dementia of does it actually improve cognition, or there was even another study showing that it might even make it worse for older adults that are more physically active. It's really hard to make sense of the literature for individuals with dementia. I'm more of the thought process that you can improve cognition, and if not, you can at least improve mood and physical function, which are indirectly related to cognition. And so in my mind, you can't lose in terms of exercise for brain health, regardless of the individual you're discussing or thinking about. But there's three different levels in which exercise can affect the brain. There's the micro level, which is the neurons, the blood vessels, growth factors, which we'll define. There's the macro level, which is the function and structure of your brain. And there's what's called the behavioral level, which is improvements in things like mood and cognition. So let's go through those, starting with the micro level. When you exercise, there's these things that are released that are molecules, proteins, hormones, growth factors that get released. And one of these is called BDNF, or brain-derived neurotrophic factor. And BDNF is released as the result of exercise in the brain, and it tells the brain to grow new neurons or new brain cells and function better. And Dr. John Ratey, in his book Spark, called BDNF miracle grow for the brain. There's other growth factors. There's neurotransmitters like dopamine and serotonin and cortisol that get released. And there's a whole host of other types of chemicals and hormones that get modulated and improved as the result of exercise. As those things get released, that can modify these neurons, these brain cells. And these brain cells can grow in number in certain areas of the brain, but they can also improve their function, meaning they function and they work better, their connections with other neurons, and it can improve their longevity and protect the neurons. So a lot of these different things are happening at the micro level that you can't really see, but through blood work and neuroimaging in humans and through animal studies, we've been able to find out. Now at the macro level, the brain can improve in terms of structure and function. So if you do end up going into a neurologist's office and getting a volumetric MRI of your brain, you'll be able to see the size of different brain regions. And with that, you'll be able to see what's normal. Am I at a normal stage? Am I abnormal? What regions of the brain in which am I abnormal or normal? And so that's a structural perspective on the brain. And research has found exercise can increase the volume of the brain in both specific structures like the hippocampus, which is responsible for memory, and the brain as a whole. But the brain is also an electrical organ, meaning it signals to different regions of the brain and to different neurons using brain electricity. And so the function of the brain can also improve. It can become more efficient with exercise. Finally, we have changes in behavior. And behavior refers to improvements in cognition, so your mental thinking abilities like attention, memory, processing speed, but also mood, things like depression, anxiety. Those symptoms can be better curbed by physical activity. And of course, if you're experiencing all these benefits, physical activity and exercise is a behavioral itself, which increases the likelihood that you're going to do more of it. And so the better you feel, the likely you're going to better adhere to that behavior. So those are all the different ways in which exercise can affect the brain. And no one's been able to mimic this in a medication. Exercise truly is what's called a poly pill, which is a type of an intervention that could be compared to a pill and affects the brain and body in a ton of different ways. So it's a very complex intervention from a very simple behavior. Now, there's also short-term benefits of exercise to the brain. And if we look at this here, after stopping exercise, let's say we exercised for 20 minutes, we went for a quick walk, or we were on the Stairmaster, the elliptical for 20 minutes, what happened? So I just stopped. 15 minutes after stopping exercise, the front of my brain will activate. And for up to 60 minutes, I have an increase in lactate, GABA, glutamate, norepinephrine. Even for up to 120 minutes, cortisol, serotonin, dopamine, all increase in their levels. In addition, different brain waves like delta, theta, alpha, beta are all increased. And here we go, for up to 120 minutes, we release this BDNF, this brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which has been called miracle growth of the brain. So those are all micro-level changes. And we talked about at the beginning that prefrontal cortex activating. So for up to 2 hours, your brain works better. You can organize things better. You can pay attention better. You can hold things in your short-term memory better. You can process information better. For up to 3 hours, we have improved stress reduction. And for up to 24 hours, we have a reduction in negative mood and an increase in positive mood. So this is just after one session. However, after 24 hours, those benefits and those short-term neurophysiological changes go away. And then we have to do it again to get the benefits. But after repeated weeks and months, some of these changes can become a little bit more chronic, meaning then, okay, now my brain is starting to get better in terms of function and structure. And even though I feel cognitively better after one bout of exercise, it doesn't stick. But maybe after 12 weeks or 6 months of exercise, it does. So with repeated exposure comes better adaptation. To look at this from a different perspective, exercise increases brain blood flow, and there's a process called angiogenesis, or the formation of new blood vessels that can occur even in adulthood. And this is correlated with neurogenesis, or the creation of new brain cells. And this makes sense because if we're receiving oxygen and nutrients, we're likely to supplement the brain in its tissues and its different cells with different types of growth factors and different types of oxygen nutrients to grow and survive and protect itself better. And what this looks like is as we exercise, we have the stimulus for angiogenesis, which would be exercise itself. It increases cerebral blood flow, so the amount of blood flow to the brain. It increases the capillary density and network, and therefore it's feeding the neuron with more blood flow and oxygen, which is neuroprotective, synergistic to learning and memory, and promotes the creation of other growth factors. Now, this is a very complicated slide, and I don't want you to read this in exhaustion. All you need to understand from this slide is that different types of physical activity will affect different regions of the brain. This isn't a perfect science. In fact, more research is coming out to demonstrate what different types of physical activity do. The only thing you really need to gather from this very busy slide is that you want a variety of things in order to have what's called a whole brain exercise program. And so aerobic exercise, resistance training, skill-based exercise, the types of activities showed in the brain here are not the things I'm exactly recommending for you, but these types of exercises are demonstrating that there's a lot of variety out there in terms of exercise and the types of things that you can get out of exercise, and therefore it's important to take part in a variety of different activities. Last but certainly not least, there are documented mental health benefits of exercise, from improved confidence to increased self-esteem, improved sleep, which is really important for brain health, mood, stress, and energy levels. So I'm sure a lot of you have questions, and I've seen a couple questions pop up about how much do I do, when do I do it, what kinds of exercise do I do? And certainly if exercise is a medication, is a pill, or as many people call it, is medicine, exercise is medicine, what is the dosage of that medicine? So let's talk about that. So the Physical Activity Guidelines for Americans, second edition, recommends that for substantial health benefits, including brain health benefits, adults should do at least 150 to 300 minutes or 2.5 hours to 5 hours a week of moderate to vigorous intensity. The intensity part is very important, or equivalent of exercise per week. Now, equivalent could be 75 minutes of high intensity exercise. And you may be thinking, well, I don't think about my exercise program in terms of minutes per week. And not many people do, but it's helpful to look at it from this perspective. And there's different configurations you could have. You could have 3 times a week of 45 to 60 minutes to hit that 150. You could have 5 days a week of 30 minutes. There's a lot of different configurations. Now, let's say you do hit that minimum recommended minutes of exercise. There's additional benefits for what's called neuromotor training, which is the combination of a physical task and a mental task. We're going to define that category better. In strength training, both of those are also important in addition to aerobic demands. The reason it's important to look at different types of activity is that multi-domain exercise programs slow the progression of cognitive decline more than a shorter single modality program. So remember, I was talking about variety having a lot of different benefits on the brain and having a whole brain exercise program. And certainly we see that in the research. So there's 3 types of exercise that we need to be aware of. There's aerobic, there's strength training, and there's this neuromotor category that I'm going to give some synonyms for. Motor training, which is neuromotor minus the neuro, and skill training. They all mean the same thing. Neuromotor, motor, and skill are all the same thing for all our purposes. We're going to define those better. In the aerobics area, we have different types of aerobic exercise. So here's the aerobics. We have steady state, which is going on, let's say, an exercise machine or going for a walk or a jog and going at the same intensity the whole time. And then there's interval training, which are undulating, high, low, or low, medium, or medium, high. There's all sorts of ways to look at interval training. Both have benefits to the brain and potentially have unique benefits on the brain. Then we have strength training. And there's different types of strength training. When I talk about strength training, I'm not referring to body weight strength training. I'm referring to external resistance or external loads. You could be using machines, exercise machines, or you can do what's called functional training using dumbbells and kettlebells and barbells and things like medicine balls that have load and you're moving in different positions versus a machine where you're in a fixed position. Now there's benefits to all of those, and each of those might have their unique brain health benefits. Finally, we have the motor or the skill-based category. This can consist of metabolically demanding activities like sports, dance, or martial arts. And it can also consist of less metabolically demanding activities like yoga, tai chi, qigong, and Pilates. Now, the benefits on the brain of aerobics and strength might be different than that of motor training. So we have aerobics, we have strength training. That constitutes what's called physical training. So whether you're lifting weights or you're swimming, that's improving the brain through metabolic demands, meaning we're getting that increased blood flow, those growth factors we talked about. But when we have coordination demands or flexibility demands or other things found in the motor training category, with an example being Tai Chi, we have neuromuscular demands. And those neuromuscular demands are directly acting on the brain and using brain activity and coordination and skill learning to change brain health and brain function. But then we have activities like tennis that have that metabolic demand and have that neuromuscular demand, and you're kind of checking off 2 boxes with one activity. We also have a very interesting type of activity called dual tasking. And I don't like this example, but one example is counting backwards while walking. There's other types of dual task exercise that certified professionals are starting to provide in different environments. Also, when I was talking about exergaming, like the Nintendo Wii, that's also dual tasking. There's virtual reality dual tasking now becoming available. So there's all sorts of different technologies and strategies for getting brain and body stimulation at the same time. Now that sounds good. And it sounds like, well, I just want that, or I just want that. But there are benefits to just focusing on this separately and just focusing on this separately. And what we're going to show is exercise programs that have a little bit of all of it. We sort of want the buffet effect. There's no one type of exercise that will do everything for you. So to summarize, we have cardiovascular exercise, we have resistance training, and we have skill-based exercise. And you want to go about 2 to 3 days a week. I know there's not 9 days in a week, but it's helpful to look at a general broad range so that there's flexibility in how you approach these. Now, if you're doing a skill-based exercise like dance, that's also aerobically demanding, so you can check off that cardiovascular day, if you will, within the same skill-based day. And you don't have to separate activities into different days. You can also do what's called a multimodal exercise program, in which you go to the gym and you do more than one thing at the gym. So I might take a dance class and then do strength training, or do 30 minutes of aerobic on the stair stepper, and then do 30 minutes of exercise machines. So these are just general guidelines that can be a little bit concerning when you look at this. You say, this is great and all, but how do I stay motivated, and how do I check off all of these boxes? And we're going to go over some strategies for that. But first, let's go over all the different types of cardiovascular exercise. I find this is an easier thing to process when you actually open up the options. When we say you need to do this, and you need to hit this many minutes, and you need to hit this intensity, it can be very overwhelming. And so what I really like to do is give people a broader set of options so that they can pick what they enjoy. And instead of becoming something that you need to do, it becomes something that you get to do. And exercise becomes more of a medium for experiencing life in the world than it does become a behavior that you have to do, that you don't enjoy, that's intensive, and you know you should do it, and you feel guilty for not doing it. And exercise is just associated with a broad negative valence of emotions. But as we expand the menu, that can become less so. So cardiovascular exercise, if you look at the top, these are things that don't rely on equipment or any sort of machinery. And so we have walking, jogging, brisk walking, running, hiking, anything that's ambulatory or locomotor. We also have body weight exercise classes or sessions or apps that you can follow. High intensity interval training is typically done with body weight exercise. We have swimming. And then of course, at the bottom, we have our things that allow us to engage in aerobic exercise with a machine or a device, such as cycling, such as elliptical, such as treadmill, such as stair stepping machines. And there's all sorts of different versions of these. There's ones that have interactive components where you're going through different areas of the world while getting a walking tour. There's ones that have games involved while you're on an exercise bike, for instance. So there's all sorts of different devices out on the market now for that. For resistance training, we have a lot of options. We have resistance training bands or exercise bands. We have resistance training machines or exercise machines. We have dumbbells, we have kettlebells, we have medicine balls. We have all sorts of things that we can use to stimulate our musculoskeletal system or get our muscles to contract to increase muscle strength, muscle size, muscle volume, but also be able to use the connection between brain and body better. Now, for the ones at the bottom, the barbells, the kettlebells, these can seem a bit scary, and I always encourage people, not just for these modalities, but for any exercise, to consult their doctor, consult an exercise professional like a physical therapist or an exercise trainer of some kind. Then we have the skill-based modalities. At the top, we have mind-body exercises like Tai Chi, Qigong, and Pilates. And at the bottom, we have more cardiovascularly or metabolically demanding activities like tennis, dance, and boxing. Ping pong is another favorite of mine. There's actually a nonprofit called Ping Pong for Good that you can go visit that has all sorts of different activities for incorporating ping pong into your exercise regimen. But there's a lot of different choices that you might have in terms of racket sports or dance or boxing or other martial arts, both on the mind-body side and on the more metabolically demanding side. So lots of options there. So let's start to talk about what this might look like in a weekly exercise plan. So here are the different options that we've gone over. We have our cardiovascular exercise, we have our resistance training, we have our skill-based exercise, and of course the different subtypes. Now, when we talk about intensity, which we really haven't talked about enough yet, I use something called the rate of perceived exertion, or what's called the RPE scale. It's essentially a 1 out of 10 scale. 10 being the most physically intense, 1 being the least intense. So a moderate to vigorous intensity would be about a 6 to 8 out of 10, except for mind-body exercise. So Tai Chi, yoga, Qigong, Pilates have all been found to positively impact cognitive abilities without being metabolically demanding. So it's just for the aerobic and the more metabolically demanding skill-based activities or the resistance where this intensity is important. And the reason I bring that up is because a lot of people say, I'm exercising in the form of walking, and therefore I'm good. But maybe they're at a 2 to 4 on the intensity scale out of 10, and maybe that's just not enough for them. So I often find that's where most people are. They need to up the intensity a little bit, but only by a couple points. A lot of people think intensity is sort of an all or nothing thing, and that's part of our, that's a failure on our culture's part of pushing this high intensity interval training only. But the moderate is starting to be found to have very confident effects on cognition and benefits on cognition. So moderate intensity, the 6 out of 10 is totally fine. I say generally speaking, you're going to have a 3 to 5 days a week program, depending on your level of motivation, accessibility, willingness, access to resources, guidance. It really depends. Once again, 2 to 3 days, but really it's maybe 1 to 3 days of each type. In terms of how long your sessions could or should last, it can really be anywhere from 15 to 60 minutes in duration. There's a lot of flexibility here, as long as you get to that minimum of 150 minutes per week. And a great strategy is to start with what's fun and what's convenient for you and not worry about hitting that exact time. A lot of people exercise for 20 minutes. They could certainly add 10 more minutes and get 30. Some people are at 15, but it's a higher intensity, so they get off the hook. Some people think they need to exercise for 60 minutes, but not always. And also, it doesn't need to be a longer the better thing. So there's no additional benefits for more than 60 or 90 minutes. So these are the requirements we have to hit, or we should aim to hit. Here's a visual on that rate of perceived exertion. So to show you the area that we're looking for with these more metabolically demanding activities, you have the vigorous, moderate to vigorous here, which is 4 to 6 for moderate, which I really like to see a 6 more than a 4. And a lot of people overestimate what they're doing. So it's important to be honest. So I'm usually looking for that 6 as a sweet spot. Sometimes that's 7 or as high as an 8 of that moderate to vigorous activity. And if you're not feeling confident with assigning a number, here's what moderate means. Breathing heavily, you can hold a conversation, still somewhat comfortable, but becoming noticeably more challenging. Vigorous, on the other hand, is borderline uncomfortable, a little short of breath, but you can still speak a sentence in broken words. So that's the subjective version of moderate to vigorous activity. Now here's a sample beginner exercise program. If you're not exercising a whole lot, or you're just walking, or you're not exercising at all, and you're not really sure where to start, this is a great place to start. Let's say you're willing to give 3 days a week to exercising, and we're going to do the Monday to Friday exercise routine here. So Monday, Wednesday, Friday. On Monday and Friday, we're doing what's called a multi-component exercise program. We're doing bike for 30 minutes. We're doing weights for 30 minutes. That's 60 minutes total. We're calling that RPE scale. That could be say a 6 out of 10. We're also repeating that on Friday. So you go to the bike, get on it for 60 minutes, 6 out of 10, or sorry, 30 minutes, 6 out of 10, and then go to the weights, either machines or dumbbells, and do 6 out of 10 for 30 minutes of that. If you're doing this at home, depending on the different types of equipment that you have, you can create any version of this, you so please. It could be a brisk walk and then lifting weights. If you don't have weights, it could be a backpack. Please be careful if using animals or children as weights. I am not responsible. Then for Wednesday, let's say you do a dance class virtually or in person or outdoors. Let's say it's Zumba, and you're doing that for 60 minutes for a 4 to 7 out of 10 on the intensity scale. And then let's say Saturday, you're going to go for a brisk walk, let's say a 5 out of 10 for 60 minutes, 30 minutes, whatever it might be. So this is 4 times 60, right? So 6 times 4 is 24, or 240 minutes. So this is about 90 minutes over that 150 minutes minimum requirement for exercise. When you look at this, and the walk is sort of a bonus, you have 60 minutes here, Then you have another 60 minutes, that's 120, and then another 60 minutes, that's 180. So just these 3 days a week alone, you're getting resistance, you're getting aerobic, you're getting skill, and you're checking off the boxes. Could it be better? Absolutely. Could you do more? Absolutely. Could you get away with a little bit less? Absolutely. But you can see this is a very, hopefully unintimidating exercise plan that does check off all of the boxes at the minimum. And it's important to work your way up to this. We'll work on some psychological strategies for that. Now, let's say you want to be more advanced. You're gung-ho, you're ready to go. Maybe you're an experienced exerciser, you've been exercising, or you're just really motivated after this talk. Let's talk about a Monday through Sunday exercise plan. Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, we're going to do what's called a multi-component exercise plan, which consists of AT, or aerobic training, RT, or resistance training, and balance training. And let's say you're going to do 20 minutes per type with a total of 60 minutes at a moderate intensity. Okay, so we're doing aerobics for 20 minutes, resistance for 20 minutes, and balance for 20 minutes. And we're going to repeat that Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, 60 minutes total. Then let's say Tuesdays and Saturdays, we're going to do Tai Chi for 30 to 60 minutes. That's, of course, a low intensity. Let's say one day you do it in a group or in a class, and then you repeat maybe some Tai Chi exercises at home. That's the mind-body component. And let's say Thursday and Sunday, you're doing a more metabolically demanding skill-based exercise. So it's going to be dance in this case. Let's say it's skill-based. That could be Zumba, salsa, ballroom, square dance, wherever it is. 60 minutes, moderate intensity. It's not as likely to be low. The reason it might be low is if you're learning some movements, which is really good for cognitive stimulation. You're not really pounding with your heart rate as you're learning new choreography, but you're increasing the cognitive demand. So once again, 60 minutes, low to moderate intensity, depending on what type of dance it is. So once again, we got our multi-component training program, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. We have our lower intensity mind-body exercise in the form of Tai Chi, and we have our higher intensity exercise skill-based in the form of dance. So that's a more advanced exercise program that's well above the 300 minutes. You're checking off all the boxes, and this is one good way to go about it. Now, you're probably wondering, what are the strategies for staying focused? Well, reminding yourself of the tremendous benefits. I do find that when you take the brain health angle and you really start to think about how helpful exercise is for the brain, that in itself is more motivating than just thinking you need to exercise or exercising for weight loss, even exercising for mental health, just to feel better mentally, and that's it. If that was your only motivation for exercise, I think we'd find ourselves doing it a little bit more. Getting accountability, and that could be from a personal trainer, a physical therapist, a significant other, a family member, people on the medical team, or a therapist of some kind. Scheduling it like a doctor's appointment. I've seen a lot of people do this. A lot of people schedule their medications. Well, if exercise is medicine, why not schedule that? Also, alarms, reminders, notes, calendars, any organizational tool that speaks to you that you use for other things, you can use for exercise. This is easier said than done, but establishing a habit, starting small, and then building upon that as you go. So a lot of people see the exercise programs I'm talking about and the requirements, they get intimidated. But if you're sedentary, just start walking. If you're walking, do it a little bit longer. If you're doing it a little bit longer, do it a little bit faster. And so you can kind of make these incremental changes over time. And focus on what you do well and not where you could be. Don't be upset that you're not a good dancer. You're having trouble memorizing the Tai Chi choreography, or don't think about that you're feeling weak and therefore you're not good at resistance training. The things you're not good at, you should actually pursue, because the fact that you're not good at them represents that they're novel for you. And remembering this cognitive reserve hypothesis that novel and stimulating activities are good for the brain will sometimes be motivating. Treating exercise like a medication, as I mentioned earlier, and then doing something instead of only the ideal. There's been a systematic review showing that after about 52 hours of exercise across 3 to 12 months for older adults with and without cognitive impairment like dementia, any type of exercise after 52 hours of doing it significantly improve cognitive functioning. So it might not even matter. I know I've just been selling you on variety is important and check off these different boxes as a guideline, but it might not even matter. Even if you're just doing Tai Chi for a total of 52 hours over any period of time, regardless of your cognitive status, a systematic review has shown that that might improve cognition significantly. So on one hand, I think it does matter, but on the other hand, just getting started and doing something, even if it's not ideal, is a helpful strategy. There's other lifestyle factors that are really important for brain health. It's not just exercise. That's just the one I like to talk about. Exercise and physical activity, as we just reviewed. Sleep, incredibly important. Diet, adhering to the MIND diet or the Mediterranean diet. Stress management, managing medications, managing comorbidities if you have them or preventing them. Cognitive stimulation and social support are all incredibly important things that you want to incorporate all of these if possible. And once again, this can sound overwhelming if you thought that just getting your exercise and physical activity ducks in a row is one thing. Yes, you do have to focus and worry about these other things, but that worry is beneficial, meaning if it's anxiety about getting this done, at least that anxiety perpetuates you to focus on it. And I think I think we're all human. We all struggle to balance all of these things. It doesn't have to be anxiety motivated or fear motivated. Although those are powerful things, it can be that you feel better when you do these things because there's inherently natural humanistic elements to adhering to these behaviors. So while we talked about exercise and physical activity being one of the most important things, I'd say sleep is probably the next in line, followed by diet. I hate to prioritize these things. And of course, working with your medical team, managing a healthy social network, managing your stress, in which sleep and exercise can be helpful for that, as can social support. And then cognitive stimulation in the form of cognitive training, going to museums, different activities like music, all sorts of things can be helpful in that cognitively stimulating category. So I'm going to pause here and answer any of the questions we have. Please feel free to put any questions in the chat or the Q&A. I will manage both. Do I have to exercise for 60 minutes in one day to get 60 minutes benefit, or is it cumulative? That's a great question. Hopefully, after I went over those different parameters, you can see that there's flexibility. It could be 20 minutes over every day to get to approximately 140, 150 minutes. So it doesn't have to be 60 minutes in one day. I am 72 years old, have bone-on-bone knees and bad neuropathy in both feet due to chemo, so my exercise is extremely limited. Swimming is out as I do not have access to a pool. My day of standing and walking is about 2 to 2.5 hours total. Great. So I would recommend that if you are experiencing challenges, mobility challenges, maybe you have fatigue, accessibility to different types of equipment and guidance, certainly I'd recommend that you work with a physical therapist if you can, given your neuropathy and your musculoskeletal concerns. But if you're already walking, I'd ask, what can you do within that walking to do either more frequent, in other words, more often, longer duration as you could tolerate, higher intensity as you could tolerate, such as walking a little bit faster, and just taking this exposure approach to getting a little bit more physically active. Seated cycling or recumbent bikes, as I found, is a nice low intensity, low impact way of getting your body moving. And I think the advantage that has over walking if you're mobility impaired is that you can pedal a little bit faster because there's low or no impact, and you can get your heart rate up a little bit higher. So those are only 2 examples. I'm sure if we work together, we could find a lot more. I've had people do a lot of ping pong and find they're able to do that. There's so many options for you, and I'd love to help out further. This all sounds great, but what if you have no motivation to get started? Hopefully the strategies I went over were helpful for that. Exercise, even just walking, has helped me stay sober for 30 years. That's amazing. That's really good to hear. And there is evidence to support that. Now you need to exercise for your diagnosed cognitive impairment. I really hope that a multimodal exercise plan will be helpful for you. So that's great. Thank you for sharing that. Really miss attending the gym and health club since the pandemic just doesn't feel safe. I think so many people are in that boat. And so I think it's really helpful to understand the virtual resources out there and the outdoor resources that are available to you. And if anything, I think this is an opportunity for us to get creative and self-sufficient when it comes to exercise. Is one time of day better exercising? No, not necessarily. This is very individual. If you find you have trouble cognitively during the day, maybe exercising before your day starts might be a good idea. Simultaneously, if you want to blow off steam and relax, and your schedule really allows for nighttime exercise like myself, that's totally fine too. How do you find local evaluation for cognitive decline? Speak to your GP, your PCP, or just doctor, and see if they can provide a referral for you to a neurologist, geriatric psychiatrist, or a neuropsychologist. I think it's important to remember that there are people living in rural areas with no access, limited income, that cannot afford gyms, swimming centers, fancy equipment. Absolutely. In fact, one of the most popular forms of exercise is walking. I think you can do so much with walking by modifying the intensity, the frequency, the duration of that walking. And I'm all about accessibility. And so socioeconomics and access is a really big component to considering how people participate in exercise. And so I think it's important to consider that. Certainly, I'm not recommending you go to the gym if you can't afford it or find one. I'm not recommending you buy an expensive piece of equipment if you cannot. So that's why I think the menu options are really important. If you have a family history of dementia, would you recommend getting cognitive testing earlier than age 60? It's certainly per your level of desire and recommendation. I think getting blood tests, cognitive tests, neuroimaging, especially if you have any subjective concerns or you're in the worried well category, certainly talking to your doctor earlier than 60 is warranted. I think you could certainly go for that. AARP via Zoom has great exercise options. And Oregon AARP is doing yoga online. Yes, Silver Sneakers is also doing some stuff. There's a lot of different types of virtual resources available. I needed a slant board for exercise, but found a rounded curve near my stairway. Oh, that's great. So if you're doing step-ups or balance exercises using what you have, that is fantastic. So I think that's all the questions we had for now. Marissa, if you wanted to come on and provide how people contact you for more information, I'd be happy to send you the PDF of these slides so that people have something to review. If there's anything else you'd like to say before we close out, that would be great.
Thank you, Ryan, so much for all of this information and for the resources and tools at the end, so we can feel like we have a little bit of a game plan with all of this new information. For those of you listening, this session was recorded, and as Ryan said, he'll be providing me with a PDF copy of his slides, so you will all be emailed a copy of the recording and his slides afterwards, as well as contact details so that you can reach out to us at Prestige and we can support you in any way that you need. As well, next month on Thursday, October 28th, we are hosting David Troxel, who is a noted dementia and Alzheimer's expert, with Angie France, our Expressions Memory Care product manager, for an exclusive Q&A session. So you can register for that at Mom and Dad Deserve the Best. And they can answer follow-up questions that you might have related specifically to dementia as well. So Ryan, again, thank you so much for joining us today. It was a pleasure having you, and we hope to have you again.
Thanks for having me. I'd be happy to come back. Really appreciate everyone's interaction and passion for this topic. It always makes this much more worthwhile. So thank you for having me.
Thank you. And thank you all for listening.